first thing I want to do is finish lecture 11. We need to do panels 8 through 11. So if you have that, pull your notes out. Has anybody already done this crossing off for this one? You guys probably haven't even looked at it, have you?
Possible D antigen with C half crossed off.
All right, so let's take a look at our reactions here. What do you guys think? Single antibodies, multiple antibodies? Multiple antibodies, and the reason you probably answered that is because you do have reactions at initial spin. You have one single reaction at 37, and then also you have some reaction at AHG. So if you do your crossing off, and this gets kind of messy, what do we know about antibodies that react at initial spin? They're usually IgM, all right? So they're cold reacting, they will usually warm away, okay? So if you notice our reactions that are at initial spin, your pattern of reactivity matches which antigen present on your panel cells? Big N, all right? And N is a common IgM antibody that typically reacts at initial spin, okay? So we can conclude that our initial spin reactions are due to N, okay? That explains our initial spin reactions. But what do we think about these reactions? This one right here at 37 and then the AHG reaction. Does it match one antibody perfect? Matches D perfect, right? And I know you're going to ask me, well, why is panel cell 1 reacting at 37 degrees? Remember, D is included in the RH family. It is known for RHs to react at 37 and then even get stronger with the AHG phase of testing. So now some information that we are not given on this panel, we don't have the genotype of the D. Is it a R1 cell? Probably I embedding. Remember we talked about the strength of the D antigen, and remember when D and C are inherited in the trans position, it weakens the D antigen expression. So this is probably an R2 cell that has a very strong D antigen expression, causing us to pick it up at 37 degrees. All right, we're not given that information, but that's what I am assuming. If this were a real panel that from a real manufacturer, you would have your Weiner nomenclature listed right here to the cell, and you could figure out, oh, that's a R2 cell. That's why I'm picking it up at 37 degrees. Does that make sense to everybody? It has to do with the strength of the D antigen expression on that cell. Cell number 1 is probably stronger than our other panel cells. Okay. All right, so the pattern of reactivity matches N, the pattern of reactivity matches D, but is anything not crossed off? Looks like JKA is half crossed off, Defi B is half crossed off, little s is half crossed off, and big E is half crossed off. When I say half crossed off, that means they are not fully ruled out, okay? And why are they not fully ruled out? What do we always want to keep in mind? Dosage, all right? So there is not a cell that is completely homozygous positive where we did not get a reaction in patient plasma that we were able to completely rule them out. So there's not one homozygous cell and there's not 2 heterozygous cells. All right, so what would be your next step? Select cells. All right, so you would definitely want to run some select cells to completely rule out all of the remaining antigens that aren't ruled out. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So Sarah makes a point that she did not have big C ruled out, and that is because big C is positive on panel cell 5. You do have a initial spin reaction in your patient plasma on cell 5, but remember, big C is in your RH family. So if your patient had anti-big C, we would see a reaction at 37 degrees and AHG, okay? So without having that reaction at AHG, we can possibly rule out big C. Again, you would definitely want to run some more select cells, D negative, N negative, big C positive to rule him out as well, all right? But this one cell right here where big C is positive and we have a negative reaction at AHG, this is panel cell 5, that kind of lets us know big C is not reacting there. And then P1, you guys probably didn't have ruled out either. What type of antibody is P1? Is it an IgM cold reacting or an IgG? He's typically IgM, so he's a cold reacting antibody. And look at panel cell 2, which is P1 positive, and our patient had a negative reaction there. Okay, so our pattern of reactivity does not match for P1. And there's another cell as well. Notice panel cell 5 is actually P1 negative, and then we do have a reaction in our patient plasma. Okay, so again, that's our pattern of reactivity. So when you guys are doing these patients that have multiple antibodies, you want to look at the phases of reactions and see if one pattern of reactivity matches all of your initial spin reactions. Okay, is the antibodies, are you dealing with multiple antibodies, one that's IgM causing the initial spin, maybe another one that's an IgG antibody. All right, and then if your pattern of reactivity matches and you can explain every reaction, then you can kind of rule in and out your other antibodies, okay? And then definitely remember, you have to follow the rule of 3. So you want to make sure that you have 3 positive cells for each of your antibodies. So in this case, we need to make sure that D is reacting and that N is reacting. And then we also want to make sure that we rule out all of the other antigens. Okay, does that make sense by running select cells? Sarah makes a comment that it is a lot to take in, and I get it, it is probably a lot, but this will come second nature to you the more you do. It takes practice. And so I'm going to post some practice panels. I'll post them in the course for you guys to do on your own, practice ruling out and identifying the antibody. I'll do that. And you guys will get practice in lab too. And so it'll kind of just become second nature. You'll get used to doing your crossing off, looking at those pattern of reactivities. Do I have any additional reactions in my patient plasma? You want to make sure you don't miss identifying any antibodies, okay? Because it is possible for patients to have multiple AHG reacting antibodies, okay? So that's why the pattern of reactivity is so important. And you are given some phenotype results. Notice down here, you have results. Anytime you have patient cells and you have results in this bottom box right here, this indicates how your patient red cells tested, all right? This is your phenotype. So your patient whose plasma we tested, okay, this is how their plasma reacted. This is the phenotype of their red cells, meaning that our patient is D negative, okay? What does that tell us? Can he build the antibody? Yes, all right? And he is N negative, all right? So that further confirms that he has the ability to have anti-D and anti-N in his plasma, all right? What do we know? How has this patient probably built anti-D? How did he get that? A transfusion. We don't know if it's male or female. If it's a female, she might have had a previous pregnancy, all right? No prenatal care, maybe she wasn't given Rogaine. Okay. right, here's panel 9. We'll give you guys a few minutes to do the crossing off if you haven't already. All right, so based on your reactions at AHG, do you think you have multiple antibodies or just one single antibody? Why do you say multiple?
Different reactions.
You kind of have reactions all across the board there. 1+, 2+, 3+, and 4+. Wow, that's a wide range of reactions. All right, so when you have a patient that reacts like this, you want to break it down. Why is panel cell 10 a 4+, but panel cell 1 is a 1+? All right, they're kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. Panel cell 1 is reacting very weak. Panel cell 10 is reacting very strong. All right, why? Why is that? All right, so if you do your ruling out, here's what you get. All right, so notice panel cell 1, our possible antibodies, you have big E and Kel, right? Everybody get that? All right, so notice panel cell 1 is E negative, but Kel positive, and it is homozygous or heterozygous? Heterozygous, so remember heterozygous cells will give you a weaker reaction because there are less antigen sites on that cell for the patient antibody to bind to, okay? So that's why panel cell 1 is only Kel positive, giving us a weak reaction versus, there's another cell, panel cell 7 is also Kel heterozygous, giving an E negative, giving us a 1+ reaction as well. All right. I think there is. Okay, now let's look at E. All right. Where is E positive on your panel cells? Panel cell 3, 6, and 10. Okay. Notice that 3 has a 3+ reaction. 6 has a 2+ reaction. Why do we have varying reactions there? Is 3 heterozygous or homozygous? Homozygous, all right? So if you're looking at big E and little e, remember that's your pair that you have to look at for homozygous versus heterozygous. Cell 3 is homozygous. Notice that we have a stronger reaction in our patient plasma, okay? Versus panel cell 6 is heterozygous, so we have a weaker reaction. All right, does everybody see that? That's a really good example of dosage. Okay. And let me make sure panel cell 6, yeah, they're both, both of those cells are Kel negative. But why is panel cell 10 giving us a 4+ reaction?
Homozygous for cow and given out heterozygous for B.
Yes. Panel cell 10 has both the Kel antigen and big E antigen. So your patient's plasma is really binding, your patient's antibody in the plasma is really binding to this cell. It's completely taken up with the antibody. All right, so that's why we have a stronger agglutination, because both antigens are present on that cell. Does that make sense? So do you guys see why the reaction strengths in BloodBank are so important? Okay. In your crossing off, did you guys only get Duffy B half crossed off? He's only half crossed off, right? Did you guys get that? You got him fully crossed off. Hold on, let me see. So he's half crossed off with panel cell 5. Oh, he's fully crossed off. But then you can cross off with panel cell 9 too. Okay.
Is that Lewis B?
You still have Lewis B. Lewis B is crossed off with panel cell 4. All right, any questions so far? Okay, all right, moving on, panel cell 10. This one's a fun one. All right, everybody got it? All right, so what type of antibody are we dealing with?
Most likely anti-little C, big E.
All right, so is that IgG or IgM? Definitely IgG. And if you look at your pattern of reactivity, it matches 1 perfect. All right, it matches little c perfect, but this is a unique situation. And you will see this oftentimes when you identify anti-little c in your patient. When you have anti-little c, because of the way C and E are inherited, you will have a hard time ruling out big E, okay? Take a look, it is very hard to find a little c negative cell that is E positive, okay? Because usually you're going to be little c positive and big E negative. That's the most common inheritance, okay? So if your patient has little c in BloodBank, we call it it's a blocked E phenomenon. And it's because we have a very hard time finding little c negative, big E positive cells. All right, so oftentimes, if you identify anti-little c, we will also give them big E negative units because we just cannot rule it out. Now we could try to phenotype the patient and see if they happen to be big E positive, then it's not a concern, right? They don't have the capability to build anti-big E. But if he is big E negative like this patient is, we have a really hard time giving our reagent cells to rule it out. So oftentimes, if we identify a little c, we also give him E negative, right, just to prevent him from potentially building that antibody. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Would we still need to run select cells since this patient is big E negative to confirm that he has anti-big E?
Oh, that's what I'm saying. It's going to be very hard. So even in our reagent commercial cells, it is very hard to find little c negative, big E positive cells because of the way those are inherited together. So I've seen this several times in BloodBank, so I am sure you guys will encounter this. In this situation, the patient definitely has anti-little c. It's just very hard to prove or disprove that the anti-E is there. All right.
Sarah said she had S crossed off, but only Cal half crossed off. Yes, Cal should only be half crossed off with panel cell 1 because it's heterozygous. What was the other one? Oh no. Yes, big S is only half crossed off. Okay. So here's an example of what I was talking about, that blocked E phenomenon. Notice the most frequent phenotype in our RHs, your big E negative, all right? And remember, we're looking at little c and big E. So in this phenotype, this patient lacks the little c antigen and the big E antigen, all right? So it's very difficult to find little c negative, big E positive cells. So that's what you're looking for here. Like this one right here, but notice the frequency is going down as you get to the bottom of this chart. And actually that's little c positive and big E positive, so it would work anyway, not that one. Again, so most of your population is, you're not going to find little c negative, big E positive cells, the way the antigens are inherited.
And these are RY and RZ.
Yeah, and notice that they're included in the very rare phenotypes. Again, it's very hard to find. All right, last one, panel 11. This one's interesting. You're going to have to look at what reagents are being used. All right, notice that you have two phases of AHG reactivity, and the reason for that is they initially tested with polyspecific. What's in our polyspecific AHG?
So IgG and complement. What do we know about complement? How is complement activated? Through an IgM antibody. All right, so when you use polyspecific AHG and you have an IgM antibody, you could have some positive reactions in your AHG phase of testing. This is a really good example of why typically in your IAT and your panel, you only use monospecific IgG. All right, so the first column is polyspecific. This column is your monospecific IgG. Notice your reactions. Because polyspecific has complement, we have some really weird, maybe very weak reactions here. All right, versus your IgG, they're all negative. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Notice your initial spin reactions, you have some weak reactions, and that's just because you're dealing with an IgM antibody that reacts at initial spin. All right, notice at your 37, you don't have any reactions. And because we're using polyspecific AHG, we're picking up on the complement that has been activated by that IgM antibody. Okay, if we were to use monospecific IgG, notice that we don't have any reactions at the AHG phase of testing. Okay, this is a good example of why oftentimes IgM antibodies are more of a nuisance in blood bank. And notice when we do our IgG AHG phase of testing, we have negative reactions. Okay. And you guys in lab today are actually going to get to do the gel methodology. Gel methodology does not have any initial spin or 37-degree reactions. You will only have your IgG AHG phase of reaction. Again, the reason behind that is, and studies have shown, it gets rid of all the nuisance antibodies. We are only picking up on what would be considered clinically significant. All right, and you guys will see that this afternoon.
So what's this 4-degree column?
So 4 degrees, in blood bank we have what we can call, you can, remember IgM antibodies react at room temperature or colder? Actually, they are enhanced when you put them at refrigeration. So see how these reactions are somewhat plus minus, meaning that it was a very weak reaction. They almost probably could have called these negative. But notice when they were incubated at 4 degrees for probably about 15 minutes, they got stronger. And that just verifies that it is indeed an IgM antibody, a cold reacting antibody. And that's blood bank calls that like a cold panel. Put it in the refrigerator, make it pop out. That just proves it is IgM. Notice that it warmed away. All right, you have no 37-degree reactions. And if you use polyspecific, you don't have any reactions either. Monospecific, sorry, monospecific, yeah.
So do we disregard the initial spin plus minus?
No, I mean, you don't want to disregard it. You definitely have an IgM antibody there. So you could still do your crossing off procedure using panels, your negative cells. So 5 and 6 and 9. Those are your only 3 negative cells. And if you did your crossing off, your pattern of reactivity should match P1. So what does the negative autocontrol tell us? It's an allo antibody. Remember, sometimes patients can have a cold auto antibody. If this was an auto antibody, your auto control would also be positive. Okay, so this is indeed a cold reacting allo antibody, like P1. All right, so this concludes our panels on multiple antibodies. I am going to post some more in the course, like I mentioned earlier, for further practice for you guys. So keep an eye on that. Probably will be tomorrow before I get them up. So from these panels that we have gone through, I hope you realize what you guys need to pay attention to. Your strengths of reaction is very important. Your phases of reaction. Is it only reacting at initial spin and then warming away? you're dealing with a cold reacting IgM antibody. Is it reacting at 37 degrees and then gets stronger with AHG? Possibly dealing with an RH antibody. Is it only reacting in AHG? Maybe you're dealing with a KEL or JKA, JKB, Duffy A, Duffy B, all right? Keep in mind, I want a disclaimer with the RH. They are known to react at 37 degrees and get stronger with AHG. However, they don't have to react at 37. They might only be reacting at AHG phase only, okay? But they are known to be picked up at 37 and get stronger with AHG, right? That's a characteristic of your RH family. So P1, Sarah, for panel 11. All right, so phase of reactivity, strengths of reactions, and then make sure if you have antigens that are still only half crossed off, make sure you guys understand that you would need to run select cells, all right? And when you choose select cells, you want to choose select cells that are negative for your patient corresponding antibody, okay? All right, so whatever antibody you have, you want to choose, maybe it's KEL, all right? So if your patient has anti-KEL and you're trying to rule out big E, you want to do KEL negative, but then positive for whatever you're trying to rule out. So it would be KEL negative, big E positive, all right? And why is that? You run it with patient plasma, you get a negative reaction that can rule out big E, right? All right. What happens if you run a KEL negative, big E positive cell and you get a positive reaction? That means he is reacting with something else other than KEL, all right? And then your antibody characteristics. Make sure you guys know that. That chart is really helpful in your lecture manual. Know like your RHs can react at 37, get stronger with AHG. Those are the characteristics that you guys need to know, all right? Remember your Lewis A and Lewis B, they are theoretically IgM, but they are known to react at AHG as well. So it's very common Lewis A and Lewis B can react at initial spin 37 and AHG, okay?